my name is Teju Shamsundar and I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager at Okta. Here at Okta, I focus on ensuring that customers are successful in deploying our adaptive authentication product. Today, you're listening to the Meet Your Okta Identity Expert podcast. This is a series of podcasts where we bring Okta's professional service experts to share their experiences and knowledge of how they've managed our customers' identities in today's online world. And for today's podcast, we're going to specifically discuss how Okta can help with mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures. As organizations look to break into new industries and verticals, mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures become very common. But when you take a look at this from a more technical perspective, there's a lot to be done in terms of directory consolidation, managing user accounts and passwords, devices, and also ensuring that employees still have access to the correct applications on day one. So to help us out in understanding how Okta can help with mergers and acquisitions, we've brought in one of our experts in this area to discuss the topic for today, Kam Ajuja, who is a Senior Services Architect at Okta. Hi Kam, welcome.
Hey Teju, thanks for having me.
So before we dive into our topic, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to Okta?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I started my career in software engineering. Started off building web applications and services at a startup. From there, building more and more of these apps, I progressed into application architecture. Ended up designing and helping build an application and services platform, which included identity and access management as one of the components. I kind of grew out of the technical challenge in that role and moved into a healthcare organization that was deploying Okta for some external facing applications. And that's kind of where I got to know about Okta, and I loved working with the product, not only from a config and management standpoint, but also the overall dev experience. And I realized, this is a product that's going places, so I joined the Okta PS team.
All right, so that's great, Kam. What do you do outside of work to keep your mind sharp?
I like to travel, not only for work, but also for fun, take road trips and photography as well. I do have a bucket list for travel, and, I try to take one trip a year, check them off the bucket list.
That sounds great. So thanks again for joining us today. Can you tell us a bit more about the customers that you work with? So how often do you have customers asking about how Okta can help with mergers and acquisitions, and how often does that come up?
Sure. So I work with enterprise customers on the West Coast, and M&A comes up quite often because with the record number of mergers and acquisitions happening in the industry, this is a hot topic for a lot of our large customers. Specifically, there are a couple scenarios where mergers and acquisitions come to the picture. It's generally new customers that have grown through M&A, and the impact of Okta on their overall technology strategy when acquiring and divesting. They want to know how Okta can help them with that, as they kind of do more and more acquisitions. And then there is existing customers that, are either using Okta today and want to onboard new employees from a new acquisition, or they are being divested off, and then they want to understand how they can kind of continue to use Okta as they work with their new parent company.
Cool. So thanks for the background there. Can you also talk about a customer example and how you helped overcome that?
Yeah. So I worked with a large healthcare organization that goes through multiple acquisitions every year. They had accumulated over, a vast area of 80 forests consisting of internal and external user populations through these mergers and acquisitions. And some of the acquired companies adopted the parent organization security policies, while others prefers to stay autonomous and, maintained and kept their own policies in place. So in this scenario, the challenge really was twofold. Deploying Okta using an architecture that supports both, easy addition and removal of these disparate directories as seamlessly as possible. And then really helping define a strategy that reduces their user migration window from years and months to, weeks. So we reviewed a few different design options ranging from single to multiple tenant models, and after weighing all the pros and cons in this customer's instance, we ended up going with a single tenant solution. So with this, we deployed Okta AD agents in all their AD forests, including their own, as well as companies that had acquired, to enable Okta to synchronize users and groups in a single Okta tenant, and define granular policies to manage these different populations that basically allowed the users to access their apps in a consistent manner, while still being able to support different types of policies that are created at think of it as like each divested organization level. So with this model, really they were able to onboard employees from new acquisitions by simply deploying Okta's on-prem directory agents, AD or LDAP, and then configuring new policies in a matter of days, testing the entire integration end-to-end in their preview Okta environment, and giving them the confidence they needed to migrate these to prod. And so basically with this model, new users were able to log into Okta's dashboard on day one with their existing AD credentials, that they know and are used to, and were still able to access all applications from the parent organization, enabling them to be really productive starting day one.
Makes sense. And with that, do you see any differences in the technical approach when we are looking at divestitures specifically?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for divestitures, they have full flexibility, in this model, allowing them to cater to specific terms of the specific deal that they have. So really, they can either take a phased approach, a coexistence approach with the new organization, new entity, and let the users migrate off to their new platform. Could be Okta, could be any other federation solution out there, or over a predefined period, or they can just simply disconnect the agents talking to that specific AD that's being divested off, on day one, and terminate access for all users in one fell swoop.
Got it. And based on the customer conversations that I've had so far, it seems like Active Directory is still very commonly deployed across a lot of organizations out there. So can you talk a little bit about how Okta can actually enhance an Active Directory deployment in a merger and acquisition?
Yeah, so Active Directory is definitely, we see quite often in enterprise use cases. And Okta has an ability to integrate with Active Directory using a lightweight agent that's deployed on-prem, and it makes it very easy to onboard users from various AD forests, that may or may not have a trust. This allows customers to import users and groups from these different forests without making any changes to those Active Directories. This really kind of removes the need for creating firewall exceptions and coordinating efforts among networking teams from all the companies involved, which really can be a harrowing task when you're going through merger and acquisition and you don't have full communication abilities between these different teams.
Got it. And I also wanted to get your insight on how companies are thinking about partner identities in merger and acquisition scenarios. How do you think Okta can help ensure seamless access for partners?
Yeah, so Okta rolled out a feature called ITB Discovery that allows companies to redirect users to different identity providers based on a variety of routing rules, such as email domain, custom attributes you can define in Okta, or IP addresses even. So really with these rules, when partners want to sign in using their own identity provider, all that's really needed is a one-time SAML federation between their IDP and Okta. So when they would log in with whatever rule we're using, let's say their domain name, Okta would know that they're supposed to be redirected to their own IDP and allow them to authenticate into Okta and access the apps.
All right, great. Thanks for sharing that, Kam. So I wanted to shift gears a little bit away from deployment specifically and get your thoughts on some of the key questions you ask or think about before engaging in a strategy to solve customer pain points.
Yeah, so there's quite a few different questions we kind of go through. So every time we start a project with professional services, we kick off with a design workshop that usually involves face-to-face conversation with customer. Can be a few hours to a few days depending on the use cases involved, And the kind of questions that we would cover in those workshops would be, looking at the estimated number of acquisitions or divestitures that they're doing, how often they're doing those, what are the current pain points with those, number of directories generally involved, not only, what the directory structure looks like in the company they're acquiring, but also their own, how easy or difficult it is to manage those. The trusts and or existing integrations that they have any with their directories, and absolutely the desired end state. So what's the end goal here? Are we planning to ingest all the users from these other directories into our own, or are we looking to keep them separate? And that kind of the goal really matters there. If the desire is to sunset those directories, we might take a different approach versus keeping these different directories separate as they are today. Really understand what they're optimizing for. Could be operational efficiency, cost, speed, etc. And then based on these factors, I architect a solution that will address the customer's specific needs.
And what recommendations do you have for customers that are looking to reevaluate their identity strategy? What should customers look for when evaluating a cloud identity solution specifically?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, really understand the cost involved with migrating identities on your current platform that you have today. Not just the licensing cost, but the subject matter experts that are required to support that system, their time and the risk with building and supporting, custom or scripted solutions. Put identity federation first when thinking about mergers and acquisitions, because a simple, standards-based, and consistent approach can take weeks off of your planned technical M&A activities, which are already jam-packed as it is when preparing for day one. And as a best practice moving forward, decouple identity from applications. And last but not least, do a POC to clearly understand how the pros and cons apply to your specific scenario.
Great. And can you also share with us what you like about helping customers with adopting the cloud and just identity challenges in general?
Yeah, so with cloud, Interop is a core requirement for majority of cloud-based solutions. So just by its nature, it just opens up so many integration possibilities that are not possible with traditional on-prem directories or really siloed systems. It certainly reduces the overall risk and complexity for them, while improving the experience for all actors, be it users or developers or admins, etc.
All right, great. So thanks for telling us about all the ways that Okta can help customers with mergers and acquisitions. I'd also like to get a sense from you on what you would tell our listeners who want to get started with integrating applications into Okta's Identity Cloud.
Yeah, it's, if you can find the app in Okta's integration network, which is publicly accessible on our Okta.com website, or if you have an Okta tenant, you can just go search for the applications in the admin portal. You can easily set up a test instance in your Okta preview environment, your sandbox environment, and test out the SSO or the provisioning workflow, end to end, which will give you the confidence needed to migrate those apps in production. And if the app doesn't exist in the OIN, Okta has a very simple wizard for apps that supports standard federation protocols such as SAML and OIDC.
All right, great. So as a professional services architect, I know you work with customers on a day-to-day basis. What's your favorite project that you've worked on so far?
So, it's quite common for customers to start their Okta journey with deploying Okta for employees, for single sign-on and lifecycle management use cases, and then moving on to partners and customer identities. My favorite project, involved using Okta for securing access for employees, partners, as well as customers, to really allow them to move seamlessly across applications, regardless of where they signed in, whether it's internal Okta tenant or external, like a B2C facing Okta tenant. And it really highlights, I like the use case so much because it really highlights all the capabilities Okta offers from Interop and scalability standpoint, and it tests my knowledge of all things Okta.
Got it. And I know you touched on this a little bit a couple of minutes ago, but how are customers thinking about Active Directory consolidation specifically when it comes to collaborating with partners?
So customers have the flexibility to migrate their partner identities into Okta and remove them from AD altogether if the apps don't require AD access or an LDAP directory behind the scenes. So this really opens up a lot of flexibility for them, because now they can control how these partners are signing in. Some could be signing in via like a registration form, versus other could be coming in from their own IDPs. And just housing them all in Okta, making Okta the master, just gives them full control over their lifecycle, without having to tie that back to a directory and then maintaining those accounts and all the attributes alongside their employees' identities. We can really make things a little bit gnarly at times.
Okay, so Kam, we talked a lot about how you can consolidate Active Directory with M&A use cases. What other on-prem directories can Okta integrate with?
So Okta supports LDAP as well, which is quite common for enterprises. So just like AD, Okta has its own LDAP agent. It can run on Linux or Windows, depending on what the organization is already using, and very simple to install and set up, and really allows to let Okta bring in users from different LDAPs, and provide really similar functionality that we have with the AD agent. Also, Okta has a new feature, fairly new feature, that supports LDAP, essentially like an interface. So if you have applications that require, LDAP queries for authentication and access, you can just use Okta's LDAP as an interface capability, LDAP interface to make calls to Okta and use it just like any other LDAP directory. That's also I'm seeing get a lot of traction these days with customers using LDAPs.
Great. And so if a customer were to have maybe a few Active Directory domains plus a few LDAP directories, could they consolidate everything into Okta's universal directory?
Oh yes, absolutely. That's quite common, because really from Okta standpoint, it doesn't matter which directories the users are being sourced from. It just sees it as another directory source. So I have had customers that have had Active Directory for employees, and then they might be using Active Directory Lightweight Directory Services (LDS) for their customers. Sun One LDAP, IBM. Lots of different types of LDAPs, all kind of pointing to the same Okta tenant, without really affecting kind of the functionality that the users would have, from Okta standpoint.
Got it. So let's also talk about some of the more common applications that we see across not just enterprise customers, but smaller customers as well. So a big one, of course, is Office 365. A lot of organizations use Office 365 for productivity. So how do you see Okta helping customers, consolidate their Office 365 tenants in a merger and acquisition?
Yeah, so Office actually does come up quite a bit, as it's a very popular productivity tool for large enterprises. So generally in M&A, we will see the two different organizations that are merging. They'll both have their own Office tenant, and from Okta standpoint, we don't have limits on the number of app integrations, so we can go ahead and set up multiple Office 365 integrations in single Okta tenant, allowing users to really continue to use their own Office environment as they have in the past, but all logging in through the same Okta tenant. So really, no limitation, lots of flexibility on being able to federate, each email domain they have configured in Office.
Great. And I know some of the other pain points that we see around Office 365 are things like provisioning, license management, making sure employees are accessing their email from managed devices. So Okta can help in those scenarios as well. Through our lifecycle management capability, you can assign permissions to end users so that they have access to only the correct applications or sources in Office 365. And now the other thing that we have is something called device trust. So a large pain point that organizations have today as well is just making sure that a device, regardless of whether it's a desktop or mobile device, is actually managed by some type of solution before an employee accesses their email. So in the case of Office 365, what you can do is actually set policies where it will check for some type of profile on the device before an end user can access it. So let's say you're a remote worker, you access email from your mobile device very often. As an IT admin, you might want to make sure that that device is managed by a tool like Workspace ONE or Mobile Iron. There's policies in Okta that can help to enforce that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And device trust has been getting a lot of traction. I hear more and more customers kind of asking for that capability because it really helps them harden their security without getting in the user's way from a productivity standpoint. So those are very good bits you shared there, and I'm seeing that quite a bit in the enterprise space.
Great. So thanks, Kam, for sharing your insights with us again. Before we close out, I just want to summarize some of the items that we've learned from Kam today. So to start, Okta can accelerate your merger and acquisition without necessarily forcing you to get rid of your on-prem AD infrastructure right away. In many cases, especially for enterprise customers, like how Kam mentioned, you may need to keep your Active Directory around for a certain number of months or maybe even longer as you finish up your migration, and Okta can help to facilitate that. And the next item is that you want to think about how you plan to decouple identity from applications. Let Okta handle all the aspects of authentication so you can focus on optimizing your IT infrastructure. And lastly, keep in mind that Okta's capabilities expand past just employee use cases. There's a lot that we can do as a cloud solution to also help with business to business and business to consumer use cases, especially if you're building your own application. So Kam, thank you again for joining us today and sharing some of your experiences and advice.
Yes, Teju, thanks so much for having me. It was great chatting with you.
Yeah, great. And to our audiences, thank you as well for joining us, and be sure to stay tuned for another session of Be Your Okta Identity Expert podcast. Thank you.